Russiagate took hold in the aftermath of the 2016 election as Democrats and liberals scrambled to find some way to reconcile the reality of President Donald Trump with their conception of how the world worked, how politics worked. You need to have political experience to become president of the United States, until recently. And just the idea that their country, the country that they consider themselves part of, could elect such a president was very difficult for people. There was a lot of cognitive dissonance. It was very traumatizing. And so Russiagate solved a lot of these problems, provided sort of a unified theory of how things worked, and it allowed Democrats to absolve themselves from responsibility for having lost a seemingly unlosable election. It allowed the media to absolve themselves of responsibility of printing complete absurdities like Clinton had a 90% chance of winning. It allowed the Clinton campaign to blame basically everybody else for losing. Basically, it solved all the problems, as religions that become popular often do. They provide solutions where there are none, make sense of nonsensical things, and provide a sense of justice in a world that seemingly lacks any. Vladimir Putin was a perfect enemy because, we had this sort of underlying Cold War heritage, and these sort of Soviet tropes just drew on those to sort of construct this new and better narrative of Russia as the enemy, of Putin as Satan. It's very difficult to just construct a narrative from scratch and hope that it sticks. It's much easier to draw on existing cultural foundations. This is why when Christianity initially began spreading, they incorporated elements of pagan rituals into their own celebrations, which is why we have things like Christmas trees, Yule logs, the fertility ritual aspects of Easter with the bunnies and the grass and stuff. So it's much easier to enforce your doctrine if it has some similarities with what is already there, rather than just dropping it on them from scratch. And so as Russiagate grew into the monster that it has become, they very early on instilled sort of fail-proof elements, because they knew that this sort of honeymoon period of people trying to make sense of a completely nonsensical election outcome would not last, and that people would eventually start questioning the narrative, because people aren't stupid. At least, people would eventually start questioning the narrative, especially as it became more and more obvious that the facts were not in line with the narrative. So it was very important to start out to smear critics from the beginning, which is why Prop or Not was released so soon after the election. Washington Post, of course, released this Prop or Not database of 200 alternative media outlets who supposedly had links to the Kremlin or were operating as Russian stooges, and accompanied by a directive to the U.S. government to investigate them as traitors, which is completely inexcusable for any sort of organization that purports to have journalistic ethics, that an anonymous organization with links to Ukraine, which has all the reasons to hate Russia, should be able to just smear alternative media associations like that. No basis in fact, no evidence to suggest that this is the case, just, that these are Russian stooges and they're traitors. So this was done very early on in order to sort of as an insurance policy for when these people would start criticizing the narrative. At the beginning, that there wasn't really a need to do so because everything was still up in the air. Really, people didn't know what had happened. But as the facts began to settle, and it became more obvious that Russiagate had nothing to do with facts or nothing to do with evidence, and it was a great theory. I mean, it made a great story, but it didn't seem to have any sort of resemblance to what had actually occurred. And so as these alternative media outlets started more and more questioning, there was already this sort of, the minds of the Russiagators have been primed to think of these people as Russian stooges, think of these people as easily discounted. So obviously you associate these people with Russia, which in the cosmology of Russiagate is basically Satan, and so they're evil. These alternative media outlets, by association with Russia, are evil, they're traitors, they cannot be trusted, you cannot even read what they say. It really solves a lot of problems. I mean, the construction of Russiagate was very intelligent, and that's why this persisted for so long. That's why it's so tenacious in the minds of its believers. These people who created this narrative were not stupid. They knew what they were doing, and it's been extremely devastating to the cause of journalistic ethics. Newspapers like Washington Post throwing away all rules in order to publish this blacklist without any sort of factual basis, without attribution. Nobody publishes anonymous stuff, especially anonymous slander. You can't do that. That's what the gossip rags do. That's what tabloids do. That's not what the journalistic establishment is supposed to do. Yet this is what they did because it fit in line with their preferred narrative, this idea that Donald Trump was an illegitimate president because he was put in place by Vladimir Putin. Thought-stopping cliches such as fake news are used so that Russiagators do not investigate alternatives to their narrative. They're basically cut off from this entire segment of media. It's very good for suppressing dissent. Stops people from questioning whether there might be some element of the narrative. Because Russiagate, while it is intelligently constructed, it also relies on a very, very flimsy basis as far as evidence. We know that the evidence is simply not there. So when they start questioning, they quickly find that there's no there, and then the whole thing collapses. And that's dangerous. You can't have that. So better just to not question in the first place. Milieu control is a hallmark of cult mind control, and that basically means controlling people's access to information. You cut off the whole alternative media from the cult member, and they will not question, because the establishment media has been in lockstep on this one. And it's just kind of tragic, because all of these journalists who are wasting their time covering Russiagate, and at the exclusion of real stories, it means that Donald Trump is literally getting away with murder. I mean, you won't read in the establishment media that his administration has refused to release the number of civilians killed by drones in the past year. And this is something that Obama did every year of his administration. So Donald Trump is literally getting away with murder. This new authorization for use of military force would allow him to go to war anywhere he wants, basically with a supermajority in Congress required to block that. And it's unconstitutional, frankly, because this Constitution says that the Congress is the only one that can authorize going to war. And so this turns that on its head. Won't read about that in the mainstream media because they're too busy talking about Russia. So it's worse than just being misleading or just being wrong. The media is dropping the ball on their responsibility to speak truth to power and to at least cover or at least document the abuses of the Trump administration. This is not, for something that claims to be part of the resistance, they're not doing a very good job of resisting. Now, we know that the end game of Russiagate is the idea of suppressing dissent. And that's why this is being pushed so heavily by the deep state organizations, CIA, FBI, NSA, whose interest is in suppressing dissent. And that's why in the cosmology of this cult doctrine, they are painted as the good guys versus Putin's Russia being the bad guys. But how do they accomplish this? Well, by smearing all anti-establishment media organs as being part of the evil Russian sphere of influence, and then by association, anybody who reads those, who retweets those, the Prop or Not got the media organizations, and then this other site, European Values, basically released the names of 2,000 people who had been on RT, and said that these guys are all basically mouthing the Kremlin line, no matter what they say, many of whom were former politicians. Everyone from, John Sununu from the first Bush administration, to Ron Paul, to, Nigel Farage. All these guys are just Russian stooges, apparently. Who knows? But if you believe these things, then you have to believe everything else that goes along with this. And this is how it goes when you've signed on with a cult. You're asked to believe more and more ridiculous things. Scientology starts with, we'll help you communicate better. And in many cases, it seems they do. You're talking to an ashtray, you will at least manage to project your will or project your voice. But then they start talking about how we were placed with volcanoes exploded by nuclear bombs billions of years ago. And it's like, oops, I guess, I'm already signed on. I can't really get back out of it now. And it's like, this is ideological mugging, basically. You're part of the Democratic Party. You're anti-Trump. Okay, well, drop your principles now. You got to align with the neocons. We're supposed to put aside our differences and be the resistance. Yeah, I'm not going to join any resistance that's full of neocons. I'm sorry, those dudes are way worse than Donald Trump could ever hope to be. The other way that this is suppression of dissent is accomplished is by just virulently attacking critics, because if they're associated with Russia, then they're evil and they must be taken out. And this dispensing of existence is the penultimate in this cult mind control. Basically, the cult decides who should live and who should die, and that's why they smeared their opponents as traitors, and that's why they call on the government to investigate them for treason. And this is what we've seen happen in Ukraine, with basically volunteer attack brigades going out to the eastern Ukraine and trying to put down the separatist movements. The government no longer even has to do its repression by itself anymore. They can outsource it to these other groups, and that's what the U.S. wants. They see what's going on in the Ukraine, and they start coming in their pants. It's really disturbing and disgusting, and they want to bring it home. So we should all be on guard against this, because this idea of smearing journalists as traitors for pushing counter-establishment lines is the beginning of a very slippery slope. And so anybody who's calling people you disagree with Russian bots, stop. Actually argue with them on the merits of their argument. If you can't, maybe reconsider your own views, because I see people getting very offended over people questioning Russiagate all the time, and you really should consider, why are you so offended? Why do you take this so personally? Why is it so important to you that Donald Trump have colluded with Russia in order to steal the election? Why is it not possible that maybe the Democrats ran a terrible candidate who nobody liked, who stole the nomination from her own party, and therefore many turned away from her and either voted for Trump as a protest vote or didn't vote at all? I'm not saying that Donald Trump is a good president. I don't think he's a good president. However, I think that it hurts the left's cause to put all their eggs in this Russiagate basket, because when it's revealed that there's no there, we're left holding the bag, and we look really stupid, and our future efforts to stand in the way of Donald Trump and to getting what he wants are severely incapacitated by this. So it's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot by jumping on this Russiagate thing as the be-all, end-all of how to take down Donald Trump, as well as getting in bed with the intelligence agencies. I'm sorry, you lie down with a dog, you wake up with fleas, and these are scary people, and these are people who want to take our rights away, who spy on us regularly, who infiltrate our groups and decimate our groups. I mean, the record of these agencies is completely horrifying, and as a leftist, people should know this, but Mueller himself presided over the unprecedented incursion into civil liberties under President Bush in the aftermath of 9/11, and people seem to have forgotten this when they put him on a pedestal and think, oh, well, he's the epitome of truth, justice, and the American way. No, this is the guy who started the unconstitutional spying on and entrapment of Muslims to try to get them locked up for terrorism they hadn't committed, and it continues to spy on Nazi Occupy groups, Black Lives Matter, environmental groups, and the anti-fracking movement is supposedly now a product of Putin's meddling. Now, this is way too convenient. Just everything that the U.S. government doesn't like, it's Putin. Why am I talking about this now? I mean, we all know that the end game of Russiagate is suppression of dissent. Well, because it looks like the edifice might be crumbling finally, and perhaps. I mean, that's true. I have said this several times. I said it in the wake of 13 indictments proving bupkis. Russian trolls buy ads about puppies? That's a damning indictment there, Mueller. Good job. Yeah, you're gonna roll that guy right up to the top. No, but there's some indication that things might be changing. The Guardian recently published an article mentioning that Nielsen ratings indicate that cable news viewership, except for like the hardcore Rachel Maddow thing, is way down because people are sick of hearing about Russia. I mean, it was apparent a year ago, the Harvard-Harris poll saying that 64% of voters believe the Russiagate investigation is dragging the country down. 56% believe there are more important matters the government should address. 73% are concerned the investigations are distracting Congress from the real issues. And 62% did not believe there was enough evidence of collusion. That was last year. That was June 2017. Only imagine how the numbers have gone up since then. Yet the Russiagate faithful continue banging away at the drum. But the Guardian, there's some chinks in the armor there, and that's good. That's encouraging. I hope that Russiagate true believers can maybe back away a little bit from this narrative and start to look generally, if you start looking, you'll find inconsistencies pretty fast. And just remember, it wasn't so long ago that you valued proof and evidence when you were evaluating whether or not a story was true or what had happened. Now, there are plenty of things that we can skewer Donald Trump on, and perhaps even impeachable offenses. This is not one of them. This is a red herring. In fact, it weakens the left because when Mueller finally comes up empty on this Russia collusion thing, we're going to look like idiots for following this story to its dead end. It's been 2 years, man. Come on. I'm not insulting Russiagators. Really, I understand that the 2016 election was traumatic to people who, especially people like me who live in New York, live in a blue state, live in a blue city, and we're not expecting this to occur, and then maybe their world was turned upside down and they were reaching for some sort of explanation for what had been a completely out of left field, like a meteor to the dinosaurs kind of event. But it does not absolve you of the responsibility of taking control of your mental hygiene, basically. Do not just take what is given you by the establishment. Question everything and do your own research. Don't accept this whole idea of the Washington Post and New York Times as a priest class that is vetting the information for you and feeding it to you in bite-sized pieces. Unless we want to end up like Ukraine with a Ministry of Information living in 1984 Orwell world, no, this is bad. This is not the way we want to go. The U.S. outsourcing its suppression of dissent so that people are killing journalists in the street and the government can just sit back and watch and sip fucking margaritas. No, fuck this shit. Let's rip out their throats.